Man, it's been hot across the US this past month. I'm making this video in the first week of September where, well, let's just say it's been unbearable across much of the US, and so I feel like there's no better time to talk about today's topic of discussion. Today, we'll be diving deep into just why American pioneers decided it was a good idea to settle and set up shop in various desert areas across the US. We'll analyze whether or not cities like Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Tucson should even exist in the first place, focusing in on each of these places' desert-like temperatures and what the mere existence of American desert cities means for livability and ultimately their urbanization efforts, or lack thereof. Now, we won't be getting into any of the highly politicized facets of the planet's evolving climate. It's just too dividing of a topic for what I hope to hone in on today, but I will note that Phoenix has been a desert and has experienced desert temps long before modern tribes and communities have ever roamed the area. But that's not to say humans haven't made it worse, particularly by way of car-centric infrastructure. But before I get into what all of this unbearable heat means for the urbanization of Sunbelt cities, if you're new to the channel, this is Fourth Place, your place to learn about US geography, urbanism, transportation, and city planning. Lately, I've found myself reading comments on just about every new heat record, Instagram, and Twitter graphic that's been posted internet-wide. From Phoenix's record run this summer of over 100 consecutive days of 100+ degree temps to my own videos about downtown San Antonio and downtown Phoenix, I've been observing just what residents in these areas have to say about the months-long sweltering heat. And yeah, I'm gonna attempt to answer questions like these too, because I too have always wondered why pioneers thought settling in the middle of the desert was a good idea in the first place. And realistically, what can be done about this? I mean, these cities exist, and apologies to Patrick Starr, but we can't just pick up the Phoenix metro area and move it to like Flagstaff or something. But if Phoenix and other Sunbelt cities don't course correct to make dealing with the heat more tolerable, then I believe as they get even hotter and even further sprawled, well, their total abandonment for more livable cities inches ever so closer. And like I said, I've been reading about what you, the beautiful and handsome viewers of this channel, have been saying in the comment section of my videos about downtown San Antonio and downtown Phoenix. If you haven't seen them, I'll leave a card at the end of the video so you can check those out. But in my analyses of these downtowns, I concluded that these cities' car-centric culture and infrastructure, not to mention their overwhelming suburbanization, is holding them back from vibrant city life. Downtown cores and historic districts have been abandoned for sprawl and car-centricity. Combine this with the heat that keeps you inside your cars and homes all summer, and it just compounds further and further into a worse quality of life. Downtown vacancies in Sunbelt cities are abundant. Old Art Deco buildings are crumbling with no plans for any type of adaptive reuse, nor any willingness by the cities to try to get people back into the dead zones that were once lively and ripe with people, culture, cuisine, and life. Since the turn of the 21st century, most of our downtowns have been neglected, and I do think this is a net negative for our society as a whole. Instead of working to revitalize these once great places to resemble something like a vibrant downtown core, the likes that Austin, San Diego, and Charleston have done so well in recent years, so many cities have settled for abandonment. And it's this blatant unwillingness to urbanize and densify in any meaningful way within their downtown cores that I think is so troubling. Whether it be through new construction, adaptive reuse, zoning adjustments, or public transit expansion, these places, particularly Phoenix, San Antonio, along with Las Vegas, Palm Springs, and Tucson on a smaller scale, have made it clear that they value cars over cyclists and pedestrians. And let me tell you, I received so many comments from people in these cities expressing something along the lines of, "We don't want dense, vibrant urban downtowns. These cities are so hot most months of the year, why would we even want to go outside? No, we'd rather be in our cars for hours on end, in traffic-ridden roads and highways, AC blasting, driving everywhere we want to go, spending as little time in fresh air as possible in our cookie-cutter suburbs and McMansions." And look, I don't want to be outside in 100 degrees, 90 degrees, hell, I even get uncomfortable in 80-degree temps, which really doesn't bode well for me this week living in Los Angeles. Sigh. But my main point here is that cities like LA aren't doing pedestrians any favors with how they're built and continue to be built. Local government is supposed to be for the citizens, by the citizens. For example, California has experienced a $100 billion tax surplus throughout the last 2 years, but instead of investing that into the future of its taxpayers, i.e. fixing roads, repurposing some of them for light rail, pedestrian, and cycling infrastructure, their current course of action is to give risk-free home loans to illegal immigrants and $200 $200 stimulus checks for residents who lived in the state prior to COVID. See, neither of these are really fair, robust, long-term solutions for current taxpayers in California. And surprise, surprise, they're now facing a deficit. And a mass exodus of cities like LA is imminent and ongoing. I certainly won't be here for much longer, and I know so many people who feel this way. When you're paying so much in taxes, only for it to be spent in the most mind-bogglingly stupid ways, you have no choice but to leave. I would rather move somewhere that values me as a citizen, a resident, a pedestrian, and as a cyclist. But getting back on track, clearly there are cities in the US that, just by existing in extremely hot climates 6+ months out of the year, they effectively encourage people to be car-centric, anti-urbanism, anti-pedestrian, anti-bike, anti-downtown homebodies for the majority of the year. This truly is the great tragedy of some Sunbelt cities. In my opinion, these cities shouldn't even exist where they do, but they do, and their effects on people and the environment have gone too far. But now what? Well, as I'm sure you can guess, it wasn't always this way. Phoenix's heat was much more tolerable before the 1960s and widespread suburbanization and car adoption. Take a look at this chart with the historically hottest and coolest years in Phoenix dating all the way back to 1897. All of the hottest years in Phoenix on record have been since 1989, with 9 out of 10 all being in the last 15 years. And all of the coolest years were before 1965, with 8 out of 10 being before 1920. Let's compare year 1900 Phoenix with year 2020 Phoenix. Just look at how many more hot days there were in 2020 than 1900. Now, it's hotter for longer, and just doesn't get as cool as it used to. 100-degree days start earlier in the year, closer to March and April, and are still lingering until November. In 1900, 100-degree temps started in May and June, and disappeared around September into October. So what can we conclude from this? Well, back then, during the 19-teens and 20s, where cars were few and far between, impractical for long distances, before highways, state routes, and interstates, most people were living in or nearby their downtown core, doing most of their transportation on foot or in streetcar. And yes, Los Angeles, San Antonio, Houston, and a bunch of other cities had their own streetcars. Phoenix too had its own streetcar, from 1888 to 1948, long since forgotten. And if you don't think dozens of 10-lane highways cutting through and circumventing cities, in combination with surface parking lots, stroads, and lack of green spaces doesn't contribute to a hotter felt ground temperature, then you're just ignoring reality. So yeah, it was hot back then, but Phoenix used to be built for it, until it wasn't. But just how have US cities mitigated against high temps and a hot sun throughout history? Well, arcading was a prominent feature in many old American cities. Santa Fe, New Mexico, although typically cooler than Albuquerque due to its high desert nature, is full of arcaded adobes, and that's the second oldest city in the nation. I recently visited San Juan Capistrano, California, which was founded in 1776, and it too is also full of arcaded pedestrian infrastructure and tree-lined shaded paths. In my opinion, when appropriate, this type of building style should be mandated in some Sunbelt cities. I'm talking Phoenix, Tucson, El Paso, and even LA. It's really a no-brainer. Think about it like this. New York City can get hot, brutal some days, but New York City's heat on a 90-degree day is much more bearable than Phoenix at the same temperature. You can have abundant, thriving urban forestry and canopy combined with tall buildings that provide respite from the heat, and it makes being outside enjoyable. I'll just walk on the shaded side of the street, which if you're on most streets in New York City, that's both sides. New York City's geography certainly doesn't hurt either, but that's also kind of the point here too. Settlements in desert climates are antithetical to long-term prosperity, and we are seeing that firsthand, compounding year after year. I mean, clearly, Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Albuquerque are outliers, as you don't have any megalopolises in these desert areas like you do in more livable climates, like the Pacific Northwest, the San Francisco Bay Area, the Northeast, and Southern California. Upon researching, it turns out that Phoenix was originally settled for its fertile soil, due to its location on the Salt River, as well as its water availability, due to its location on the Salt River, and its climate, which was more bearable due to its location on the Salt River. And about that Salt River, nowadays it looks like this most of the year, bone dry, besides monsoon season, which I hear is a very tolerable facet of Phoenix's climate by and large. Sarcasm aside, I mean, this is a city founded on the abandoned lands of a primitive Indian tribe who likely deserted the place centuries ago in search of land more conducive to year-round prosperity. Nobody knows for sure what happened to that tribe vibe, though. Las Vegas was originally settled as a rest stop along the San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake Railroad, and was likely never meant to be much more than that, a refueling and water stop. Heck, the old flyers advertising the railroad pay no attention to Las Vegas as a notable destination at all. It wasn't until the construction of the Hoover Dam and the new population of workers and subsequent mob bosses cashing in on that in the form of legalized gambling and casinos that Las Vegas's population started to swell along with its temperatures. I believe these cities were never meant for anything more than a rest stop along a railroad. Nobody actually wanted to live in a desert in a time before air conditioning. It just sort of happened. Really, they were just the best place to settle circumstantially. And unfortunately, the modern settlers, you and I, are paying the price. And with vast, flat desert landscapes, coupled with the advent of AC and the mass suburbanization of the mid to late 20th century and beyond, well, the potential of suburban sprawl was limitless. And it happened in every single one of these places, making them hotter, more spread out, and car-centric. Cities dismantled their streetcars to make way for vehicles. Now, in the summer, we can't walk anywhere. And since they destroyed the streetcars, we have little to no alternate transportation options in these cities, and we're stuck in our cars, weaving our way through the sprawl, subjected to the unbearable heat with little to no respite, unless we're locked in our cars at homes for months on end. And it's no secret that mass suburbanization has led city planners and NIMBYs alike to block, defund, protest, and work against most urbanization efforts, even so much as better cycling and pedestrian infrastructure, not to mention better availability and access to abundant streetcar and light rail, like they had 100 years ago. But why would any NIMBY want to step outside when they can get everything they want delivered straight to their front doors? In effect, small businesses suffer, downtowns become decayed and decrepit, leading to high crime rates, further leading to the neglect of downtown and historic core urbanization and revitalization. It's maybe the most tragic cycle of post-industrial era urbanism. Okay, apologies, as I'm about to single out some commenters that really spurred my making of this video in the first place. This commenter on my video about how parking lots are killing San Antonio starts out by letting us know just how hot San Antonio really is throughout the year, going on to recommend not visiting the city between the months of April and October. That's over 200 days in the year where the city experiences a climate so uncomfortable that visiting is just not advised. That's just not the case for most cities in this country, even those with snowy climates. Like, you can go to Colorado in mid-January and have a great time. Layer up, let the plows and salt bags do their thing, and you'll have no problem enjoying a walk around Pearl Street in Boulder. And my reaction to comments heating against visiting the city is like, well, why do you subject yourself to these living conditions? As a native, no less. If you have the means to live in a more, livable city, then why don't you? I'm genuinely curious about this, so if any of you live in any of the cities I've mentioned in this video, let me know why you stay in your Sunbelt city given just how hot it is during the year. Why live somewhere that's unbearable without air-conditioned blasted cars and homes? A city where you can't even walk outside without being drenched in sweat 7 out of 12 months of the year. That's a majority of the year where your city is, at least as far as climate goes, unlivable. Couple this with the fact that some of these desert cities are the worst offenders as far as sprawl, lack of public transportation, and lack of pedestrian infrastructure, and it all just really has me confused. There are, in fact, other cities in the US with a diverse array of industry and job opportunities where things like, being able to comfortably walk outside and live in a more urbanism-focused neighborhood for the better part of a year is possible. Places that care about and provide for pedestrians, cyclists, public transit, and aren't stuffed with interstates and car-centric culture. And it's really unfortunate because in the time since Sunbelt cities were first settled, they've formed things that you can't just pack into a suitcase and move to a more urbanist city with you. Things like culture, landmarks, your favorite bar or walkable neighborhood, historic sites and districts, coffee shops, rec centers, and sports teams. While these cities I've mentioned certainly aren't thriving with abundance of the aforementioned assets, these places have amassed certain cultural value, and they're not going anywhere for the time being. But if the issues discussed in this video aren't promptly addressed by, for example, reintroducing light rail or streetcar, adding more regional rail, adding arcaded construction when appropriate, adding better pedestrian and cycling infrastructure, regreening and providing shade wherever you can, building housing up instead of out, and getting rid of parking lots and trying to mitigate sprawl, well, these cities might experience a mass exodus in decades to come. As millions poured in for cheaper costs of living, they'll move out when the jobs have dried up, the heat becomes even more unbearable, and they don't want to commute for hours a day to get where they want to go. And finally, for a comment I'll single out in a more confrontational manner, no matter how cute the pup in their profile picture is. First, this comment starts out by saying, even though they have no certain proof of it, they claim I've never been to San Antonio. And just for the record, I have. Briefly, I'm talking no more than a day or two, but at the same time, anyone with access to Google Maps and online parking data can deduce that, yes, parking lots are killing downtown San Antonio, or at the very least holding it back from meaningful urban growth. But more to the point of this video, they point out in their last sentence that no one wants walkable cities in 105-degree weather, and that San Antonio is larger than LA, which means sprawl is natural and necessary? I don't know. Claiming that nobody wants walkable cities in 105-degree heat is like saying nobody wants to eat Five Guys because there's no Five Guys around. Like, no, Five Guys is awesome, but some places tragically just don't have one. It's the same with this argument. People don't want to walk outside in the heat because it's hot. It's because cities have not acted to mitigate the heat so that we can comfortably walk. They're not building their cities for pedestrians, that's clear. They're building them for cars. If there was abundant shade, outside fans, arcading, less asphalt, and more green, then people would want to go outside. There's a huge difference between standing in Los Angeles in the middle of a parking lot and standing in LA shaded by tall buildings with trees all around. It's just that that's harder to find in the places I've mentioned in this video. That's it. I simply don't buy that people would rather commute for their needs than have them met in a short walkable distance broadly. And if you're watching this channel or any other channel that discusses urbanist topics and talking points, then you'll appreciate the premise that people do want walkable cities, especially in a country that's lacking them so drastically. I'm not saying everybody wants that. Nothing is definite except a verifiable fact. But just because the majority of Americans are subject to suburban sprawl and a life inside cars doesn't mean they don't want out. People want to walk around, engage with others, and interact with the environments in a meaningful way. While 100-degree heat surely does make that less desirable, I think the reply to this comment offers a fantastic rebuttal from top to bottom, and I hope that I've expanded on it today. Congrats, Gruffy Snuggles. You pointed out that San Antonio's geographic woes are worsened by the city's car dependency by the way of metric tons of asphalt and pavement needed to facilitate its car centricity and sprawl. Even better, Mr. Snuggles goes on to point out that adding more density and pedestrianization in the form of regreening, as well as reducing exhaust from vehicles by operating light rail, streetcar, people movers, subway, and beyond, can and will help reduce the heat, or the felt effects of hot temps. The people of Phoenix, Tucson, Albuquerque, Las Vegas, Houston, and the Palm Springs metro area want their city to be as walkable and as transit-oriented as DC, Denver, Portland, Seattle, Boston, and Philadelphia, even if the more car-centric folk haven't realized it or won't admit it yet. And with that, I'll see you next week from 4th place.